thank you for joining Growing Tech Fast, the condensed Org3D podcast, where we talk about growing tech startups with those who have grown them. So today I am joined by Vieje from Secfi. It's great to have you on the podcast today. How are you doing?
Doing well. Thanks for having me, Holly. Really excited to be here.
Absolutely. I'm excited too. Great. Okay. So for the benefit of our listeners, can you just tell me a little bit about who you are and what your mission is at Secfi?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm the Senior Director of Equity Strategy here at Secfi. I know that's probably an unusual title for most, but I'll explain how it came to be in a second. But at Secfi, what we do is we help startup employees and executives make life-changing financial decisions, starting with their stock options, right? So we've all probably heard the stories of that individual who had that spray painted Mark Zuckerberg's office, got stock options in Facebook, became a millionaire, or my cousin's cousin who became a millionaire at DoorDash or whatever it is. And that's enabled through stock options. And historically, what we found is that employees are underserved in this area. Startup employees it's kind of a funny prospect, but startup employees are underserved and not getting the advice and help that they need when in regards to stock options. And potentially is an individual's biggest asset in their personal portfolios. So what we do in the most basic sense, we help all startup employees and executives with their stock options.
Love it. I think it's really interesting. We at Org3D obviously work with startups ourselves, so we know it all too well. And I think it's great. I think what you're doing is really cool.
I really appreciate that.
Okay. So tell me, how did Secfi come about?
Yeah, absolutely. So Secfi was started just about 5 years ago. Our founders, Walter and Frederick, they're actually early stage startup employees. And I think, I might be triggering some of the audience here because a lot of people have gone through this, but effectively the company just grew way too quick, which is a great thing to happen, right? You want your company to grow fast. That's the point of a startup. But what people don't understand is that when a company grows too quick, sometimes stock options become too expensive to exercise. So when Fred and Walter left to try to start their own venture, after a couple of years, the company grew like crazy. And after a couple of years, they decided to leave the company. They were hit with a $1.8 million tax bill to exercise their options. So an awful situation. I don't know about you, Holly, but I don't have $1.8 million in my bank account.
No, I wish.
So neither did they at the time. I still don't know if they have it right now, but they had no way to pay that cost, and they ended up losing their equity because of it. So an awful situation, but became the driving force for starting Secfi. They spoke to a few friends at Uber, Lyft, Airbnb, which is still private companies back then, and they all had the same problem. So they launched Secfi shortly thereafter to help solve this problem for startup employees.
Wow. Amazing. And what was your background before Secfi, and how did you begin this journey?
Yeah, absolutely. I come from a very unique background, probably atypical from your typical startup employees, right? So I actually started my career at PricewaterhouseCoopers at PwC. So back in college, I had an entrepreneurial itch. I started some businesses when I was a teenager, and I always thought I was just going to go into engineering. But I went to business school, started liking some of my classes there. And I met this amazing tax professor that made tax fun. I know this sounds weird, and I'm probably scaring some of your audience right now, but taxes was like kind of my thing, where it was a puzzle, it was confusing, it didn't make any sense. And we had a tax professor, Bill Ressler, who convinced me to take one of his classes. That one class became effectively my major, and I ended up staying and doing his master's program for a year. So I have a master's in tax law. And I ended up going to work for PricewaterhouseCoopers afterwards. Long story short here is that, studying tax law is not the same as practicing tax law. And it was not what I expected. And I still had this entrepreneurial itch. And I met these, at the time I was working at PwC in New York, advising hedge funds and private equity firms on their taxes. And I also switched to a consulting role where I was implementing tech for them as well after a couple of years. And I met these two Dutch guys starting a startup. They said we needed someone who knows taxes, who knows financial products, and is interested in tech and wants to grow a company. And the stars really aligned for me on that one. So I ended up joining Secfi in 2018. Was my first quote unquote VC backed startup, and haven't looked back ever since. Helped grow the company to what it is today.
Nice, cool. And what is your favorite thing about Secfi since starting?
Yeah, it's kind of a cliche answer, but I'll explain it a little more. But the people, I think what's unique about us, right, is that we are very not just spread out domestically, but spread out internationally as well. Our co-founders are actually Dutch, and they actually are from the Netherlands. We have an office in Amsterdam. Our product and engineering and other teams are based out of there. And what's amazing about big cities like London and Amsterdam is that you get people from all over the world. So we have people from South America, Central America, Eastern Europe, Western Europe, even Africa, and it's really fun to kind of hang out the different cultures. And we also have an office in San Francisco, New York, and we're pretty spread out through the country. So it's really fun culturally, and it's a great work environment. So have to say to people, even though it's a little bit of a cliche answer.
No, I like it. I think that's really cool. Great. Now, I know, Vijay, we spoke previously about some of the differences between US and European equity. Can you just go into a bit more detail for our audience about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And Holly, I did a presentation on this at Slush last year, so last November. Slush is a big, I think it's not too popular in the US, but it's the premier startup conference in Europe.
Okay.
And I did a presentation there on European equity / stock options compared to the US. And without going into excruciating detail, long story short is that Europe is a little bit behind the US when it comes to granting employees equity. And it's become one thing that's actually very interesting when we looked at the data, the studies. Most European companies just started, most VC-backed European companies just started granting employees equity.
Yeah.
And when we spoke to them, a lot of what we heard was, we only started granting people stock options because we wanted to start hiring in the US. So it became a necessity, right? So it was kind of this weird thing. And we looked at the numbers, it's like, wow, Europeans in general get tiny amounts of stock options compared to the US counterparts. Now, I think that's changing. That's starting to grow as more and more European unicorns are born. I think more and more employees are going to be demanding equity. But you don't have to go too far to go look at some of the European companies out there that have recently minted unicorns in the last 5 years. And there's a few of them under fire because not a lot of employees have stock options, if any, in the company. So starting to change, but we're not there yet. We have a lot of work to do, and we're excited to kind of be part of that change as well.
Yeah, that's super interesting and super important as well. I mean, I'm based in the UK and work US markets, so completely agree with you, and I can see that for sure.
Absolutely.
Okay. And so in your experience, what are some of the most common things startups need help with?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing that's always overlooked is stock options, right? I think it's, in one sense, you kind of taught this as a startup, focus on your core competencies, grow the company, outsource everything else, right? One of the things that typically gets, outsourced and people don't really think too much about it is equity plans and how you're going to deal with it, right? And the thing about equity and stock options is it isn't a problem until it becomes a problem, and that problem happens when the company succeeds, right? So at the early stages of companies where founders and early employees are just growing the company, stock options aren't a huge deal. They're not worth that much or not that expensive to exercise. There's probably no tax bill. But the biggest thing is that's when all the planning, the most of the bang for your buck when it comes to planning comes from that moment and at that point in time. So a lot of people aren't doing that. And then, 1, 2, 3 years goes by and a company grows, raises a massive funding round, and then they go, oh crap, we forgot to think about our equity. All of a sudden it's cost, it's going to, instead of costing us 20,000 exercise, I'm going to need potentially millions of dollars and hundreds of thousands to exercise. And it becomes a problem. So what I would say is, one of the initiatives we've had recently over the last 1 to 2 years, we've been partnering with a lot of fast growing startups to provide equity education, help their employees understand their equity, help them understand that the biggest planning opportunities are right now, when that equity's value is still relatively low compared to what it will be in the future. So what we're seeing is a lot of startups are responding really well to that. They say, we want our employees to be happy. We want to make sure that they have the tools, the resources to make the best decisions for themselves. And we want to make sure that they value their equity, and we help them do that. So that's one thing I think that's been our focus, and obviously with us focusing on stock options, but it's something that early stage startups really need, in my opinion.
Absolutely. And what are you currently excited about in the equity space and at Secfi more specifically?
Yeah, well, I think just in general, just how much innovation and how many startups are growing and achieving unicorn status. And I know we had a crazy market last year. We're coming back to reality a little bit. So maybe that was a blip in the radar. But at the same time, I think it's one of these things where overall, I don't think innovation is stopping. There's a shortage of founders out there. There's a shortage of startups. There's a shortage of startup employees, right?
Always.
But the ecosystem is growing. It's becoming more mainstream, right? I was taking a quick break earlier and watching CNBC, and they're talking about tech startups, right? So, we were previously, kind of just a fad, and I think people thought we were kind of a fad, like .com bust and all these things. But I think it's growing. It's becoming the future. People realize tech is the future, and just the amount of money flowing into startups. It's really cool to see because there's some amazing companies and products being built right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm really glad you said that. And I'm glad that's the way it's going, because it's good news for us. It's good news for you guys. So yeah, that's great. And on to more the overcoming failure side of things now. Now, I use that failure word lightly, but maybe more overcoming hurdles. So are there any particular moments that have triggered a change in your approach to startup life, either personally or through Secfi?
Yeah, I mean, anyone that has worked at an early stage startup, they've gone through a lot of failures, right?
Yeah.
That's the reality of it. Yeah. I think there's sometimes a stereotype for people who don't do it. It's like, oh, startup, you're playing ping pong, hanging out in the garage, hanging out with each other, free kombucha on tap, free kegs everywhere. And the reality is it's not that, right? You're grinding, it's hard. You're gonna get punched in the face, quite often. So, I think my first kind of holy crap moment I'm in the startup was, back when I joined late 2018 and early 2019. I remember things are chugging along. We were just launching our product. Reception was amazing. People were excited. We were growing the company, growing revenue. We found product market fit. And then one of our key partners decided to be like, no, we're going to stop doing this. Like, we actually don't have, we can't keep on servicing you. And it was one of those things where like everything was like going well, and it all of a sudden went to screeching stop. Like, we had to stop doing deals. I was freaking out. It's like, oh no, like, are we, is it over? What are we gonna do?
Right.
And it's kind of one of these moments. Is like, if for someone who hasn't worked at a startup, moments like this happen all the time, right? Yeah. But it was my first experience going through it, where we don't have the luxury of working for a big company with 20 different partners, right? We had one partner that we're working with, and without going into detail, it was just it ended very poorly. We didn't have a good relationship there, but I took a step back and maybe realized that startups are really hard. Up until that point, the first few months were about, bro, this is amazing, close a deal, bring revenue in. Our investors are excited, and out of nowhere, sometimes someone comes and sucker punches you in the face. And ever since then, that was almost a little over 3 years ago. You start to kind of understand that these things just happen. That's part of the startup world. Sure. Instead of beating yourself up over it. You learn how to deal with it. Learn how to deal with hardships, and you overcome them. And we overcame. We were okay. We came out better from it. It's one of these things that, looking back on it, yeah, it was a good thing that happened to us.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it definitely, I think, brings you back to earth, but also prepares you for the next time something happens, and then it's less of a hit once you've already experienced the worst.
Exactly. And I thought that moment, this is going to be the worst thing that's ever happened to Secfi, and lo and behold, like this is just like a once every 2 month type of deal.
Yeah. Cool. Now, this is maybe one of my favorite questions to ask my guests on this podcast. And that's, if you could, what would you tell your 20-year-old self?
Party left. No, I'm just kidding. I would probably, looking back on it, I think the biggest advice I'd have for my 20-year-old self is, I think similar to that, my joke earlier, it's party less, but when you do things at 20, you're not locked in, right? I think at that moment, I had this idea that's what I majored in is where I'm going to have my career for the next 40 years, and I'm gonna be locked into this, and I'm going to do this, and that's going to be my choice for life. And what I would say, it's like, in the long run, those decisions you make at 20 and in university, like, they do not dictate your entire life. Of course, there's going to be an impact, there's going to be a ripple effect. But I know so many people who major in something, think it's for them, and 6 months later they leave and start a career. It's completely something different. And that happens more often than not, actually. And I think back then when I was 20, I kind of, had to think like, oh, I did a grown up thing, go to university, major in what I want to study, take a job there, and that's it, kind of that's your career path. But I think, and because of that, I think it kind of made me a little risk adverse, if you will, because I'm like, I'm gonna have this good job here at PwC, and nothing bad about PwC, it just wasn't my long-term ambition. But I think it made me knowing what I knew, would I have started more companies back then? Would I have tried to do something different? Would I have taken a risk and decided to go travel for a year instead of moving to New York? I don't know. I don't know how much would have changed. I'm in a great position. I have a great life right now. But what I would definitely tell myself is those decisions you make at age 20, they're not for life. There's an impact, but it's not as big as you think it is. In 10 years, you're not even going to remember that. So what I say is go chase those passions, take those risks, take those chances, because, that's the time to do it.
Yeah, and I guess we say this a lot at Org3D, it's trust the process and just trust that things will fall into place, because most of the time they do. Yeah,
do you all watch basketball? I think that's the Philadelphia the 76ers motto for a while. Trust the process.
We don't all watch basketball. I'm not sure where the phrase comes from, but it helps. If you're having a bad day, it's just knowing that it's, a year from now, that bad day is you're not even going to remember it. So
absolutely, exactly.
Sure.
Completely agree.
Okay, and now flipping what we've just spoke about, what have been the best moments in your startup career?
There's a lot. I mean, I think for all the hardships going to startup, the beauty behind it is kind of being like, oh, we did it. We did accomplish this amazing thing. But probably the coolest moment, I think, earlier this year, we took a company trip to Iceland in June. Okay. And I remember just sitting there, close to 100 people, Secfi employees. We're like, oh, wow, I was employee number 6 or 7, I can't remember at this point. And we're almost 100 people and watching this all happen. I'm like, this is a real thing. This is a real company. That was so cool to see.
I bet.
I think, like, just looking out there and be like, wow, I helped build this. There's nothing more rewarding than that, right? So I think that was probably one of the best moments there. I think just seeing the growth and what we accomplished.
For sure, so rewarding, so nice to see and look back on those happy and frustrating memories too, but fun memories.
Absolutely.
Okay, and to completely flip that on its side, what has been one of the worst moments in your startup career so far?
Yeah, really good question. I hate to bring up COVID-19, but I think I have to bring up the pandemic.
Yeah.
I mean, kind of another one of those hardships, right? We overcame 2019. Everything was, we had the big partner pull out. We came back. We were growing again. Things were chugging along, and then all of a sudden, this COVID-19 thing just starts to hit, and next thing you know, it's like the world's at a standstill. And I think it wasn't the lowest moment in my career because of Secfi having to kind of grind to a halt and figure out what's going to happen. But it was more so being disappointing our customers, right? I think it was that moment where, what we did was the market was going crazy. We didn't know what was going on. We had to kind of halt everything because of that, right? Because, part of what we do is provide financing to employees so they can exercise their options.
Yeah.
And that's an investment decision. And, what the best thing to do for our investors is to kind of wait it out and kind of see what's going on. Just like the rest of, other investors did the same thing. But, there's a human element to all this. We were working with a lot of employees and executives that really needed help with this, and we couldn't help them at that moment. And now it's just so disappointing to see because, stock options are really important to these individuals. It became one of those things where, I don't want to, I had to look our clients in the face and say, look, we can't do this right now. We're going to need to see what happens in the next few months. And that was an exceedingly difficult time for us because of that, right? It wasn't, forget the revenue, forget, the having to halt hiring. It was more just disappointing our customers. And you never want to go through that again. Hopefully it happens once every 100 years.
Yeah.
And that was it for my lifetime. But again, another one of those, difficult moments in the.
Yeah, for sure. I think what's interesting about COVID, and a lot of my guests have said similar things, but they've also said on the flip side, it has taught people how to adapt to life when you've got no other choice, but to work from home and to deal with everything closing down. And I think a lot of people the world is so different now, in a good way for some elements. And I think it's taught us a lesson.
Absolutely. I think it's, most of us, people our age, Holly, we kind of had a very cushy life. We didn't have a major war like our fathers did, or, our parents might have, or grandparents. And, things have been rather cushy. And I think this is like that first moment like, oh man, life can be tough at times. And I thought, that's a very interesting kind of way to think about it. But I thought that was I completely agree.
Yeah. I know another thing we wanted to talk about is some of the recent layoffs in the tech industry and the startup world. And I was intrigued to know some of the advice you might give to employees that may have unfortunately lost their jobs recently.
Yeah, it's it's really unfortunate right now. Obviously, things got a little out of hand last year, and I think a lot of companies are being forced to pull back. What I've been telling our clients is, anyone that's been affected is, number one, take a deep breath, take a step back. I have a personal, story of one of our best hires, one of our best employees at Secfi came to us after he was laid off from another company. And he has been amazing. It's been one of those situations where, he mentions that we're the perfect fit for him, and he's glad it happened to him. I hear these stories over and over and over again. So I guess first off, take a deep breath. Life is going to be okay. You're going to be okay. Do not panic. The next thing I would say is start to make a plan, right? I think a big part of this is making a financial plan. If you have stock options at that company, assess what they're giving you, your exit package, figure out a plan for that. Talk to someone who does know, talk to a financial advisor if you need it, discuss what that looks like, and make a financial plan for yourself. You have the luxury of being able to take time off and rethink what you want to do. Now's a great time, right? I'm telling a lot of our clients, I've gone through it, and we're planning, we're creating financial plans for it. It's like, it may not happen. Hopefully this is like the one time it happens in your life. It may not happen again. Maybe it's a good opportunity to sit down and reset, get a good break and think about life. Not everyone's going to be in that fortunate position.
Yeah.
But I think anything from when it comes to finances, right? I think you have to, number one, get that under control and figure out what you can and can't do. Create a plan with your advisor. Make a budget if you need to, things like that. So I focus on the financial side of things. That's probably going to be the biggest consideration.
Yeah, great advice. Yeah, I think that what I got from that was turning almost quite a negative thing into as positive as you can make it, and using that time for yourself, which I know again a lot of people did in COVID, but again we don't get a lot of time in our adult life where we're not working. So if it's happened and it's out of your control, you may as well make the most of it.
Yeah, absolutely. 100% agree. I think you can't control certain things in life. What you can control is your attitude towards it.
Exactly. Love that. Okay. Intrigued with this question. Who are some of your role models, Vijay?
Role models. Wow, there's a lot. I think. I think one recent one that I've been. So I just read Frank Slootman's book called "Amp It Up" on. He's the CEO of Snowflake, and I just love the way he approaches business. I think his mindset. I don't want to spoil the book because it's a really good book, and everyone should read. Everyone in business should read it. Nice. He took ServiceNow to a public company, grew that into a fantastic business. And then he joined Snowflake at a time that was, Snowflake was doing well, but not great. And they became one of the most successful companies out there in recent memory, most successful IPOs in recent memory. And I just love the way he approaches business, his mindset. His one of the things he mentions is that he wants bus drivers, not passengers. And I've taken that in my day-to-day work, right? He wants people driving the bus, not just on for the ride. And I love the way he takes business as a competition, right? That's the way I kind of view it. I think Mark Cuban said, business is the ultimate, team sport, right? So, that's the way I kind of view things. And I love the way he approaches it, his mindset, his mentality to attack every day. So, and he's one of them. I think Jeff Bezos, what he's done on the business world is just amazing, right? Taking Amazon, just to have that mindset of, I'm going to take it up, create an online bookstore, but no, that's not it. There's a whole mess of other things I'm going to do down the road. And their most successful product is, AWS, Amazon Web Services, which is who would have guessed that, 30 years ago or 20 years ago. So, just two names that I think I've recently just been, reading about and studying.
Love it. I love that the bus driver mantra.
It's a great book, Holly. I recommend reading it.
I may have to read that book, and I may have to steal that quote. Okay. Finally, then, what are some of the best bits of advice you've been given in your career?
Oh man, I'm fortunate to have a lot, but I think one thing that always comes back to me, it's actually, maybe not career related, but became kind of like one of my mantras for life. High school football coach, Al Gamboa, very quirky dude. And a lot of American football coaches are a little bit, weird and quirky, but he always used to have these sayings all the time. But the one that always stuck with me was "Winners do what losers won't." And it was kind of one of those things where at the moment, I was high school, I was a teenager, I was 16. And I was just kind of like, like a lot of teenagers, we're a little lazy, we complain a lot. We don't want to do much. We don't want to put in the hard work. And it made me realize I like that quote. I know he said it in relation to football, but I take that to my career, right? Like it's doing the little things in life that people don't want to do. It's cleaning up a CRM at 9 p.m. after a long day of calls, right? It's sending that extra email to check in with someone. It's taking that one-on-one with a direct report to ensure that they're doing okay, right? It's, to be successful, you got to do all those little things. And I think I really appreciated that piece of advice. It's something I still quote today, and I use when I'm sitting in the office, I'm tired, I want to go to sleep, I want a beer, I have a mountain of work. Well, winners do what losers won't. So let's get it done.
I like it. I think it'd be crazy to see if everyone took that mindset on, how crazy of a difference they'd see.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Lovely. Great. Well, that is, it's come to the end of the questions now. So it's been a pleasure speaking with you, Vijay, and hearing your story and getting some of your wisdom. I've definitely learned a lot. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Holly. This is a lot of fun.
No worries at all. And thanks to everyone listening, and tune in next time for Growing Tech Fast.